So I have a bit of a confession to make. I never grew up with an Atari in my household. I have no nostalgia for one, and I've never owned one. I was more of a Commodore guy with the VIC-20, Commodore 64, and Amiga were all systems we had at home growing up. But I did scratch that Atari itch over the years, looking at various systems such as the Atari ST, 800, and the XGS. Atari in the 80s was a household name, but most of us had forgotten about them after the rights to the company had been passed around to different investment groups over the years. It just felt like Atari was a company that was headed down a different path. They were mixed up in all sorts of questionable business decisions such as blockchain, NFTs, building hotels, and even gambling. The Atari VCS was a system that was shrouded in controversy, and its eventual release did present a system that did everything that it was advertised to do, but it was quickly forgotten, seemingly too little too late. Atari seemed destined to fail, but in 2021 something changed. Wade Rosen took over as CEO, and since then has slowly but surely turned the company around, piece by piece. Atari has been regaining trust of their customers, and that has come in the form of acquiring companies such as Digital Eclipse, who has developed the exceptional Atari 50, probably the very best retro collection that's out there, packed full of features and still gets updates with more games being added. And of course Night Dive Studios, who has worked on remastering older games such as Turok, Dark Forces, Quake 1 and 2, and of course System Shock. But acquisitions isn't all Atari has been doing. They've been working to recreate their classic line of consoles and games. The 2600 Plus released in 2023, recreating after 46 years the original wood-grain VCS system. They've also worked on recreating their old back catalogue, including games from the VCS and 7800 games. And earlier this year we saw the release of the Atari 400 Mini, and in 2024, and the focus of today's episode, the Atari 7800 Plus, which is a modern recreation of the classic 7800 system that released 38 years ago in 1986. The 7800 Plus is inspired by the original 80s design, and it's a scaled-down version that fits in your living room and easily connects to modern TVs via HDMI. It supports both 2600 and 7800 game cartridges, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the very first game console to feature backward compatibility, which is pretty cool. So we're going to take a look at the 7800 Plus in today's episode. Now before we begin, Atari did ship out this product for me about a week ago, and I've been playing it for much of that time. However, I do want to be clear that there was no commitment for me to make a video. I made this video out of my own will because I wanted to. I think it's a pretty interesting product to talk about, and I do know there are a lot of fans of Atari out there. But here's the thing, I'm happy to call out any type of issue that I don't like, and if it means I'm not going to end up on the hardware maker's Christmas card list that year, then I don't really care. Transparency and no BS is what we do here on the channel. Fortunately, however, there is much to like about the 7800 Plus. I think collectors and fans of Atari will be very pleased. However, it's not perfect, but we're going to address all that in this particular video. As mentioned, Atari did send me this promotional box, and it's fantastic. Opening it up really shows off everything here. We've got the system front and center here in the middle, two wireless controllers and their adapters to connect up to the base console itself. Not only this, there is also a handful of 7800 games that are also included, and this is fantastic packaging. Sony, please take note here. The PlayStation 5 Pro, which costs easily 5 or 6 times as much, pales in comparison here. Good packaging and first impressions when unboxing are important, so great job here, Atari. I do want to be clear that this promo box was sent out to reviewers only, so if you did purchase your 7800 Plus on Atari.com's store, you'll receive something that looks like this instead, which includes the console itself, one wireless controller, and a pack-in game, all for $129.99. Now, taking a look at the unit itself, for all intents and purposes, it's identical to the original 7800 in design with a small few differences. Now, obviously, the size is smaller to kind of facilitate the smaller, more sleeker style of a 2024 console. And on the front, there is the power switch. Next to it is the pause button. Now, this is a handy feature that is new to the 7800 Plus that allows you to pause any game at any time. Now, back in the day, many games couldn't be paused at all, so this is actually a neat quality of life feature. And this is probably the first area that I was a little confused about, because I wasn't sure if the 7800 Plus was using FPGA or emulation. And I can confirm that it is using emulation. Atari.com's website does disclose that 2 emulators are being used for the 7800 Plus. Pro System Emulator version 1.3, which is a 7800 emulator open source that's been developed by Greg Stanton, as well as Stellar, which is the 2600 emulator, which is obviously what is used for the backward compatibility portion of this. But to be very clear, yes, this is emulation. Now, obviously this is going to maybe make you feel differently about a product like this, but at the end of the day, if it's using emulation, FPGA, or just native chips, it doesn't really matter as long as the user experience is the same. And that's where things get a little tricky for me, because the first test that I ran when I first connected up the device and plugged it in, I noticed that the games, although they do run very, very well and there's really no issue, there is a very, very long loading screen for every single game that you insert into the device. So for example, when I started testing the first game, I powered on the device, you can see the Atari logo for a few seconds, and then it goes into this loading screen. And this loading screen can take about 10 to 15 seconds. And this is very, very puzzling to me because we're talking about ROMs that are kilobytes, not megabytes. These games are very old, from the 80s, and the size of these games are tiny. You can fit pretty much the entire 7800 collection on a small flash drive. I mean, we're talking about a 512 megabyte one pretty much for just about everything. And another test was to remove a cartridge while the game was loaded, which did reset the 7800 Plus. And then when I inserted a new one, I figured that maybe because everything was already loaded into memory, its OS and everything, the emulation layer was ready to go, that it wouldn't have to do it again. But for every cartridge that you connect to the 7800 Plus, it takes about 15 seconds to load. And this is something that I would absolutely like to see fixed in an up-and-coming firmware, assuming that this system is firmware updatable, which I believe it is if it has a USB-C connection. But this is really something that I didn't like off the jump. It's something that you're going to notice immediately. I expect these games to load instantaneously, just like the original version. Any type of recreated system really should just add or complement what the original system is doing. And unfortunately, this is a step back. Now, it's not all bad news because the games themselves, as I tested them, they all ran exceptionally well. And I was able to connect up the wireless controller, and I will say that the feel of this controller is very, very good. And playing through these games, I didn't notice any type of issues at all. However, there was one strange thing that I also noticed, and this had to do with the game Food Fight. Now, this is something that I'm not sure if it's just my system, my setup, but hopefully someone can clarify this as well. But one of the things that you'll see here is that when I was testing these games in the kind of real world test that you can see here, we've got it connected up to my modern display. There is a frame rate counter on the top right, and as you can see, it's locked at 60. As we would expect, this particular system should run all of these games at the refresh rate that it was designed for, which is 60 FPS here in North America. But one of the games I plugged in and tested here, which was Food Fight, you can see that that counter drops to 50. So for some reason, this particular cartridge that I'm using appears to be either the PAL version, or maybe there's something else going on here. And look, if there's someone else out there that can help me understand this better, please leave a comment below. But I wasn't expecting the particular game to drop its frame rate to 50 in any capacity. This is a North American unit, so I wouldn't really expect to see that happening here. The only answer I can come up with is that this game, for whatever reason, that was packed in with my particular system is a PAL version. But let me know in the comments below if there's any information here that I'm missing. Now, the 7800 Plus runs at a display of 720p. Now, if we take a look at the original specs of the 7800, the maximum screen resolution in North America was 320 by 240, which means we're getting a 3 times upscale, which isn't too bad. Now, also on the back of the device, there is a switch to change the aspect ratio from 16 by 9 to 4 by 3. The 2 joystick ports on the front are the same 9-pin connectors as the original 7800, which means that you can connect up your old joysticks if you prefer, but the included wireless joypads are nice. In the hand, the joypad feels a bit stiff, but you don't really notice it when you're playing the games themselves. The plastic feels a little bit cheap, but overall, really no complaints. On the underside of the console is the Atari branding and serial number, which I own, number 32, which is pretty cool. Now, testing out the games themselves, because I don't really know what I'm looking for comparing it to the original games, because I didn't own the hardware back in the day, it's very hard to compare, but I will say that all the games that I tested here do run flawlessly. There is very minimal input lag, and the sound effects that I heard in the game was of a high quality. And overall, no real complaints here at all. If you do have a 7800 collection and indeed a 2600 collection, then the 7800 Plus is something that I think will be something that you want to buy. The other really cool thing about the 7800 Plus is that there is a very good homebrew community out there that are still making games for the 7800, which means that all these games will be supported on the 7800 Plus. Now, as far as compatibility is concerned, I don't really have the answer to that. There's going to be other people that probably find issues with certain games, ones that are more, hardware intensive or do different, hardware tricks, for example. But Atari themselves on their website claim near perfect compatibility. They don't claim 100% across the board, and I think that's a good thing. There's obviously going to be edge cases. There's obviously going to be some games that have trouble running on the 7800 Plus, and I think that's really up to the community to identify those things. But the main takeaway here is that hopefully Atari does listen to the community and offers any firmware updates to address these things. The difficulty, however, is because it is tied to emulation, open source emulators that are developed by someone else, it means that any potential fixes to game compatibility may never see the light of day unless Atari themselves have their own internal developers that are working to enhance the emulation experience themselves. Now, the last thing that I did was open up the system to take a look. All you need to do is turn the system upside down, and there are 5 Phillips head screws that you just need to unscrew with a regular screwdriver, and then turn the system back upright and then just lift off the case. Now, there is one single connector that you need to be mindful of when you do lift off the case, but as you can see here, there is actually quite a bit more that's going on than I initially expected. But the board on the right hand side facilitates the HDMI and ensuring that there is a video signal going in to the main board itself, and the SoC that's powering it is a pretty cheap Megawin SoC. I'm not sure the exact model number that it is, but you can see here it's a pretty low cost, low powered one, and I would say that this is something that only probably costs maybe $1 to buy. So the whole goal here is to have a pretty cheap, low power, low cost device, and this is pretty cool to see that there is a system that's built on something like this. But another way to look at it is Atari themselves obviously are charging $130 for this particular product. And at the end of the day, you're not really paying for the power here, because we're talking about systems that were released in the 80s, and we're not talking about very demanding emulation or demanding, processing power. It's really about the entire experience. And for $130, you're getting the base system, you're getting a controller, you're getting a pack-in game. And this is about right for me. I do think that maybe they could have, thrown in a power brick, as mentioned previously, and potentially offered a little bit more value in this packaging. But overall, I'm pretty happy with the price point they've set here. I think that at the end of the day, this isn't anything that anyone that's new to the Atari ecosystem will be too interested in. Ideally, this particular product is geared for the same people that were interested in the 2600 Plus, and that is to revisit your childhood of owning these systems back in the day, or you're someone that is a collector and you basically collect old Atari consoles or anything Atari related you want to collect, or as someone that you do have a library of old cartridges but you don't have a system to play. It's really geared for someone that was invested in the Atari ecosystem previously. I think anyone new that's kind of wanting to check out this system, you're probably not going to be interested in a device like this at all. And for many of you, you're probably just going to want to run RetroArch and an emulator. And like I said, all these ROMs will be available for you anyway. So at the end of the day, look, I'm very happy with this particular product. There is some issues that I do want Atari to really kind of figure out and fix, because I think the biggest one for me is just the god-awful loading times on this particular system. I don't really know why that is the case. But it's not a deal breaker, but it's definitely something that you want to be aware of, especially if you're someone that is, you've pre-ordered the system and you want to check it out for yourself. But look, maybe I'm kind of overstating it too much. I'm not sure, but it really did kind of throw me when I was testing all these games, especially if you're someone that is constantly swapping games in and out and want to basically just get your fix of Atari goodness, for in an afternoon or something like that. The last thing I do want to mention before we wrap is that because this is using emulation, there is a 0% chance that any type of flash cart will work on this system. So if you are someone that does have a 7800 flash cart, then this device will probably not work for you. Now I do say probably because I haven't been able to test one myself, but because it is emulation, it's unlikely that that would be the case. But what do you guys think of the Atari 7800 Plus? Have you pre-ordered one? Are you looking forward to getting one? Is this something of interest to you? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I think it's a pretty good device, and I'm happy that I was able to review one on the channel for you guys. Hopefully you'll make some informed decisions if this is indeed a product that you want to buy for yourself. But we're going to leave it here for today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, don't forget to leave me a thumbs up, and we'll catch you guys in the next episode. Bye for now.